you need it. Just let you know. Hey, here we go. Okay. Can you see that okay? You need it brighter. Yeah, it's the ambient.
We just have to kind of do what we can here.
Do you want to roll the... We're live? Okay. Thanks to well, no one's joining us by live stream, but for posterity. Yeah, recording.
It's warming up.
Great. Okay, fantastic. So every year we have two keynotes. A clergy keynote we had last night, Father Turbo. Thanks again, Father Turbo. That was over the top, amazing, incredible presentation. I didn't sleep. I was still pondering. I was like, I actually had a powerful dream right before I woke up that I think that was I think inspired by that talk. But today, I'm also super excited because our late keynote is a guy who doesn't realize this, but he lives in my house all week long because I'm constantly playing his podcast whenever it comes out. So his voice is echoing through the halls of even the church. Sometimes I'll be walking around with my phone on and listening to the latest thing. So this no, not to make you feel awkward, but that's what we do here. So Richard Rohlin is an Orthodox Christian, an author, podcaster, medievalist, and data analyst. That's what you have to do so that you can do all your fun things.
You got to pay for books somehow.
Yes. He lives in Grand Prairie, Texas, which is outside of Dallas area. And he's a husband and father. He is the co-host of the Amun Sul podcast, which is on Ancient Faith Radio. Is it the Tolkien podcast as well?
Well, no, so you just go to tolkienpodcast.com. We stole that, so it'll just redirect you right to the Amun Sul podcast.
Yes, in case
Amun Sul is hard to remember.
Yes.
Tolkienpodcast.com.
I have to say, if you love anything Tolkien, you have to listen to this podcast. It's so deep, so good, and it's nice because some are like, Richard goes deep dive into things like the Silmarillion, which he's doing right now, but also, is it you and Father Andrew that are reading through The Hobbit together?
Well,
or it's guest people?
Yeah, we have like a sort of a rotating cast of guests that come in. So.
Right, yeah, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. My favorite segment is they're taking the hobbits to Isengard.
You're gonna write next week's episode then. I sprung it on somebody.
It's hard. I mean, he asks some hard quiz questions. You have to know you're a legendarian. But that's not all that he does. And in fact, when I thought of him coming, I'm like, we could ask him to come and do Tolkien stuff, but he already does that all the time. I'm like, again, this is a place for conversations to have that you may not have a venue or a place to have them anywhere else. So I said, please do something that is your passion that you don't normally get to talk about. And so he's coming to talk to us today, as you can see, about DC Comics, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Other things that he does that I would love to have you listen to is his work with Jonathan Pageau on the Symbolic World podcast. They have kind of a sub-podcast in that called Universal History, which is absolutely brilliant. If you ever wanted to know the kind of continuity or connection between Christian tradition and kind of world stuff, world history and world religions and things, and how it's not just some glossed over paganism, but actually the profound fulfillment of all human hopes. I think you'll really appreciate it and enjoy that podcast as well. You can also check out his books, and the latest thing that has just come out, which is really neat, and he's got a few copies for sale here today. He doesn't have a table. We didn't want to have him have to be anchored anywhere, but he does have about 15, 12 copies, I think.
Yeah, 25.
This is the Akbaritha, to which is appended the Songs of the Seven Cities, which of course you all know about, translated into English by Richard Rohlin, which is a beautiful literary conceit because it's something that came to you in a dream, right? It's an impressive little piece of world building of a fantasy world. Now, does this become part of your RPG that's coming out?
Yes.
The World Under Shadow?
World Under Starlight.
World Under Starlight, which is currently in the works, and do you have a Kickstarter for that coming up?
So it's going to be coming out that I did with Darkly Bright Press this last year, and it exceeded all expectations. So we're going to publish a much larger book this year as well. So you can, I'll share links at the end of the presentation, like I said, but you can keep an eye on Darkly Bright Press for that.
When I saw that the gaming material included recipes and liturgies, I was like, I'm in. Bring it. Yeah, I'm all over that. Yeah. So, but today we're actually talking about superhero genre, which is a common topic here at Doxacon. And in fact, he also has written some superhero pulp novel, which is in works for a graphic novel called The Guardians: The Eye of Horus, which talk about maybe distinguish it from Moon Knight, maybe.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, with no further ado, Richard Rohlin.
All right, so I'm on a Chromebook today, which I'm starting to think was a little bit of a mistake because it's a little wonky when it comes to doing stuff like this. So I might have to. So I've got my notes and then the presentation, and sometimes PowerPoint will let you like have presentation on one screen and your notes on the other screen, and it's not letting me do that today. So it's gonna be a little unwieldy. So just bear with me. Some slide transitions might be a little slow. So I want to talk about a meaning crisis on Infinite Earths. I want to talk about comics. I want to talk about nihilism. And I want to talk about the multiverse, which basically means I want to talk about everything. So first of all, who am I? Why am I here? What does a Tolkien scholar have to say to you about superheroes? Like Father mentioned, the stuff that I'm most known for. Hold on. I promised my wife I'd record this. There we go. Okay. Just for her. So the stuff that I'm most known for is is a Tolkien podcast, the Tool podcast that Father just mentioned, and the work I've done on medieval universal history with Jonathan Pajot. So people tend to sort of think of me as their medievalist friend. How do you know you're somebody's medievalist friend or somebody's Tolkien friend? Whenever a really fun meme drops out there on the interwebs that has to do with the Lord of the Rings or has to do something with the Middle Ages, I'm the person that 25 people send it to at the same time. Like, I'll just open up my Facebook Messenger, and it's 25 people have just all sent me the same meme. Hey, I bet you haven't seen this yet. This is really funny. What do you think about this? So that's how you know you're everybody's medievalist friend. But actually, I really love comic books as well, and I don't get a lot of opportunities to speak about them in public. So I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm really grateful to the St. George community, to Father David, to everybody for to letting me come here and do this. So my relationship with comic books started when I was very young, and it happened because my dad, who was not actually a very avid reader of comic books, but he was really into Superman, and I, just like the movies, right? The Christopher Reeves Superman movies, and so he was really into Superman, and so that was a big part of our family culture when I was a kid, and so so I watched through multiple times. The entire, there was like an old black and white Superman TV show in the 50s and 60s. I watched through that. I've seen every single episode of the 1960s Batman more than once. And I can tell you the exact moment when, as a child, I realized, wait a minute, they're making fun of this. It was when Batman pulled out his Bat alphabet soup container. This is about season 2, season 3. It's like towards the second half of the show. He pulls out his Bat alphabet soup container, and you can literally see a hand handing him this thing from like behind his cape. And they weren't even trying at that point. And that's when, as a 10-year-old, I was like, wait a minute, I think this is a parody. But up until then, I took everything just uncritically. So I've always loved superheroes, and if you're ever passing through, I think it's Illinois. There's a little town there called Metropolis, Illinois, where they some of you are nodding like you've been there, where they completely redid the entire it's a very small town, but they turn it into a giant tourist trap for Superman memorabilia. There's a really cool museum there. I mean, if you're into this stuff, it's pretty fun. So that was my childhood. I grew up loving comics, telling superhero stories. When I was about 16, I started a tabletop game with a system that I designed myself. It was a superhero game, and ran that for 16 years. Everyone today that's my closest friend, or almost every single one of my closest friends today, including the woman that I married, were in that game. And so this stuff is still part of the, when we get together, when we talk, when we chat. I mean, these are people I see multiple times a week. That's part of our sort of shared poetic referent that we have with each other. So this stuff is really really special to me. Up here on the slide, I've got a picture of Wally West as the Flash, painted by Alex Ross. Wally West as the Flash is my favorite superhero. That's always the first thing people ask. Somebody asked me this morning, so what's your favorite comic book? And I was like, oh boy, I have so much to say. But people are always like, so who's your favorite superhero? And I'm like, well, it's the Flash, but it's specifically Wally West as a Flash. There's nothing wrong with Barry Allen, but it's always the one that you grew up with, right? So when I was growing up, Wally West was the Flash, and well, he was Kid Flash, and he was a Flash. Anyway, so I grew up with him. I grew up with this guy, and so he's my favorite superhero. So I want to talk today. I'm gonna start out by doing this in kind of an abstract way, sort of little Jonathan Pageauian kind of a way. So I'm going to talk about why we have superheroes. It's a weird thing. They're almost only an American thing. Even when other countries do superheroes, they do them in an American way. And so I want to talk about what superheroes are, why we have them, why they're important in our culture, kind of how they developed, and then we'll get from there into talking about the multiverse. And I'm going to kind of wrap this up by taking a look at 3 important works which, taken together as a trilogy, have something very important and maybe slightly wrong, we'll talk about that, to say about the question and the subject of nihilism and the multiverse. Those 3 works are, it's really a trilogy of big crossovers. Crisis on Infinite Earths, Infinite Crisis, and then Final Crisis. And taken together, by the way, in case anybody's counting, it's about 1,400 to 1,600 pages of comics. And in preparation for this talk, I sat down, and in one evening, it took me 7 hours, I read them all straight. That's what I did Thursday night. And my eyes were just bloodshot by the time it was over, and I was, I was hearing the colors by the time it was over. It was kind of intense. But so I want to talk about, so let's start out by talking about, what is a superhero? What's this meaning crisis thing all about? So, during the Middle Ages and up to the dawn of the modern era, we had something that I'm going to call the sacred story. Sometimes it's called, in sort of more technical settings, maybe it's called something like the medieval consensus. That's what a lot of people call it. But I'm going to call it the sacred story. It's a story that emerged out of the ancient world. It's something that was forged from Christianity and Christianity's Hebrew predecessors, but also from the best parts of paganism. This story redefined and rehabilitated a lot of the stories of the old dark world and its old dark gods, and among other things, it transformed the understanding of what it means to be a hero. So the Greek word for hero, that we get our word for hero from, usually meant either a human endowed with divine favor, somebody like Achilles or Hector, such as in the epics of the Trojan War, or a demigod, somebody who is part god and part man, such as Heracles, Aeneas, etc. Someone whose deeds led to the founding of the city-state that you lived in, somebody whose shrine is celebrated through these localized chthonic cults and rituals. So if you were in a city, the city of Athens, right? The city of Athens has certain heroes, Perseus and so on, right? Who are demigods. They're sort of half human, half gods, famous heroes who are then worshipped in the city of Athens as being sort of what are called titulars of the place, local patron deities. And it does not follow that because these people were considered to be heroes, let alone gods, that they should have been good. They're not good. They're not kind. They're not selfless. They're not moral. They're not any of the things that we associate with heroism. For the ancient pagan world, it was enough that these people should be powerful and often accidentally responsible for the foundation of the city-state. Now, the forging of what has sometimes been called the medieval consensus did 2 things to transform what it means to be a hero. The first is that heroic strength became inextricably, it doesn't matter today if you're an atheist, you can't get away from this. Heroic strength became inextricably and forever associated with Christ's passion, and by extension, the suffering and the heroism of the martyrs. Thus, self-sacrifice became a necessary prerequisite for heroism. After Christ, the wrath of Achilles in the Iliad could only ever be considered heroic via allegory. And by the way, there are lots and lots of Orthodox monks in the medieval world who are very concerned with how do we read the Iliad and the Odyssey as Christians. The thing that we're doing today, this is not a new thing, right? You can go. Dumbarton Oaks has a great collection of Byzantine texts translated into English now, and among them you can find allegorized Christian readings of things like the Odyssey. Right? Look at the Odyssey, the content. First of all, the Odyssey is a food blog. Fight me over this. Like, go read the Odyssey, and it's like, and here's the story of how I'm now preparing this meal, And I love the Odyssey, but it is definitely, it's an ancient food blog. But, there is nothing particularly Christian about the content of the Odyssey. I mean, obviously, you look at Odysseus and just the things that he's doing just in the poem, and while his wife is being super faithful at home, what's Odysseus up to, right? But the church was able to take this story and find Christ in it, right? And so the thing that we're doing today, the thing I'm about to do, the things that Father Turbo was doing last night, this is not new stuff. This is what our church has always done, right? And we need to remember that, right? So the saints, and primarily the martyrs, by virtue of their suffering, they replaced the heroes of the old world, both as heavenly patrons and also as local principalities. But the stories of the old heroes were able to be retained and repurposed through allegory and romance. And so in a way that's, I grew up evangelical, and we were always told, I was always told as a kid, oh, well, the saints that the Catholics worship, we didn't know about Orthodoxy, but those saints that the Catholics worship, those are just replacements for like the pagan pantheons, right? But in a way that we didn't know, that's sort of true, right? It's closer than maybe we thought, because the Christian church really did replace the gods and heroes of the old order, shattering their demonic hold on the world, but also redeeming their domains into something higher and something that had a place in the Christian household. So the principality that watches over the city of Thessalonica is not Demeter, it's Saint Dimitri, right? So the problem is that something happened, and the sacred story, from our perspective, from a human perspective, from a historical perspective, the sacred story shattered. And there's a variety of reasons for this. They are too complex for me to repeat today in the time that I have. If you're curious about why the sacred story, this consensus in Western civilization began to unravel from about the 1500s to the 1900s. Something happened in the 1500s, I don't know, until it finally shatters in 1914 with the beginning of the Great War. There are 3 good books on this that I'll recommend to you. There's Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, which is such a good book, everyone should read it twice. It's only 800 pages, so if you start now. There's also a great book called C.S. Lewis's Discarded Image, where he gives a great overview of the medieval consensus and then talks about the reasons why it broke down, but also the reasons why it's useful for us to rediscover. Really important book. I wouldn't be an Orthodox Christian today without that book. And then also a really long book. Yes? I'm sorry. Yeah, so the first one is Charles Taylor's A Secular Age. The second one is C.S. Lewis's The Discarded Image. I'm sorry, the text is a little small. C.S. Lewis's The Discarded Image, and then a third book, also very long, by Brad Gregory called The Unintended Reformation. And these are all really good books if you just want to understand why the world is the way that it is today. So it seems to me not to be a coincidence that the costumed hero, the mystery man, and the superhero arose immediately in the wake of what many believe to be the beginning of the end of Western civilization. And of course, right here, I have a picture of a tank from the Battle of the Somme, which is a battle Tolkien fought in, and is one of the most horrific things that has ever been, that's ever happened to our civilization. So, right there in the years, right around the First World War, and in the decade, the interwar decade between the First World War and the Second World War, these costumed heroes begin to emerge. And so we see countless heroes costumed at first without superhuman powers, and then the superhuman powers come in to the thing very quickly. So in 1919 you have Zorro, which I've always loved Zorro. Basically any version of Zorro, I'm like, sure, I'll watch this. The Shadow, who knows? What was it? Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows. I love audio drama, and when I was a kid, we would take these long road trips, and as a family, and we would we'd stop at Cracker Barrel, and they had cassette tapes that you could get with all these old audio dramas on it, with like the Blue Beetle and the Shadow and Zorro and the Lone Ranger and things like this. So I would just get those, and we'd listen to them as we drove together as a family, and it really inculcated obviously a love for these kinds of stories, but also a love for audio drama. I still think audio drama is maybe my favorite medium for storytelling. I just love to listen to things. I love the sort of like the purity of it, and also there's sort of an aesthetic quality when you take the visual part of it out, where you have to just tell a story only with things that you can hear. I think is pretty neat. The Phantom in 1936. This Phantom, by the way, is the first superhero to wear spandex, so kind of important. There was a great Phantom movie that came out many years ago, like the late 90s, early 2000s, with what's his name in it? Billy Zane in it.
That was fantastic.
I love that movie to death. It's so fun. Superman, obviously, 1938. Following him, Superman's most successful ripoff, Captain Marvel. Not Captain Marvel from Marvel. That's much later. But you kids call him Shazam today. Captain Marvel. And that who was actually much more popular. Okay, so this is goofy. Captain Marvel was actually more popular than Superman, but then Captain Marvel had a spin-off. Freddy, what's his name? What's his superhero name? Thank you, Captain Marvel Jr. And Captain Marvel Jr. became more popular than Captain Marvel. And so when some guy, I don't know, Elvis Presley, you guys heard of him? When he was putting his get-up together to get up on stage and do his little music routine, he had this short cape and this high collar. That was a Captain Marvel Jr. reference. Not a Captain Marvel reference, it was a Captain Marvel Jr. reference, who he really took a lot of his shtick from. So anyway.
He also wore a lot of lightning bolt.
Yes, yeah, it's all part of it. Yeah. And then Batman, of course, in 1939. So the 40s are the golden age of comic book superheroes. Most of them take on, for obvious reasons, in the 40s, most superheroes take on an extremely patriotic tone. Everybody goes from beating up bad landlords to beating up Nazis. And this is something to point out, is that the bad guys at this point, they're not yet supervillains. They really aren't supervillains at this point in time. The bad guys are the enemies of the common man, which tend to be bad landlords, mobsters, people who are ripping off poor people during the Prohibition, right? Corrupt politicians, and of course Nazis. Right? Nazis are. I mean, it's always okay to punch a Nazi. If I learned anything from comics, it's doesn't matter what's going on. Do I need a bad guy for this? Nazis. Boom. Done. Settled. So there's no level playing field. It's not like Superman doesn't have anyone to fight that is his level of power, and that's fine. That's kind of the point, right? The point of Superman is almost this kind of a wish fulfillment. It's what if somebody came in and did the things that I wish I could do, but I can't do because I'm poor and because I'm weak and all these other things. And so that was the golden age of comics, and comics begin to take on more of the form that we recognize moving on into the Silver Age and the heroes of what I call the heroes of science. So this is in the 50s and 60s. It's the nuclear age, or as we say in Texas, the nuclear age. And some of you, one person laughed. And so in the 50s and 60s, the Silver Age of comics saw a shift towards heroes, towards backstories, towards villains, and challenges more in keeping with the nuclear age. So characters who had gotten their powers from scientific experimentation. Famously, this is when Marvel Comics comes around. And every early Marvel character that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby came up with, how did they get their powers? Radiation. They got bitten by a radioactive spider, or exposed to some cosmic radiation, or bombarded with gamma radiation, or there's just like there's got to be a lot of cancer in the MCU. And so a good example of this is the Green Lantern, one of my favorite superheroes. So the Golden Age Green Lantern had gotten his powers from a magical lantern, which gave him powers. Silver Age Green Lantern got his powers from because he's a space cop, right? And so as it was, it was a very, very different kind of a premise. A lot more science, a lot more focus on sort of science as the kind of the driving force for a lot of these characters. And so this era is the origin point of many of the staples of the genre. This is really where the concept of the supervillain is actually developed. The creation of most of Marvel's roster happens during the Silver Age, and very importantly for our purposes, it is where the idea of the multiverse is introduced. Now, to understand the idea of the multiverse, which although it doesn't originate with superhero comics, for instance, the multiverse, one of the early sources of the multiverse is the Elric books, right? But it really makes its way into the popular collective consciousness primarily through comic books. And the people that are making all of our material today that's got all the multiverse stuff in it, Rick and Morty, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, stuff like that, those people grew up reading these comics that I'm about to talk about. But we need to first understand the emergence of the costumed hero itself as the result of the shattering of the pattern of our sacred story. So when the sacred story shattered, the old principalities, right, which had been embodied by heroes and by saints, suddenly were without a home, without a body. You could just think of these principalities as sort of like abstract ideas, right? Hero, champion. I'll give you an example, some tangible examples here in a moment. When the sacred story shattered, when we stopped being able to, as a civilization, we stopped being able to honor the Mother of God. Right? It's really remarkable if you go over to some countries in Europe. So I was in Lithuania recently with Father Andrew Stephen Damick. And in Lithuania, most people in Lithuania are Roman Catholic or with a small minority of Orthodox and a smaller minority of Lutherans, and that's it. And but there's certain wonder-working icons of Our Lady in Lithuania. We saw 4 while I was over there. Certain wonder-working icons of Our Lady over there, which are universally venerated. It doesn't matter what kind of Christian you are, you'll put one of these up in your church, and you'll put one of these up in your home. Like Our Lady of the Gate of the Dawn, which was sort of the titular icon of the city of Vilnius, which is the capital of Lithuania. Beautiful icon. Very large icon, really about the size of 2 of those window panes. Very large icon of Our Lady. And beautiful icon, and if you go to any Orthodox church in Vilnius, they'll have Our Lady of the Gate of the Dawn. If you go to any Roman Catholic church in Vilnius, they'll have Our Lady of the Gate of the Dawn. If you go to any Protestant church in Vilnius, they'll have Our Lady of the Gate of the Dawn somewhere on the wall in the church. Right? So this used to be, I have a theory that you're not really Christianized as a civilization until you have a Our Lady of this place, right? I'm dead serious. Like, I really, and so, of course, in America today, it's difficult. We're largely a Protestant country, and it's by no means universal. So when this consensus shattered, when the sacred story shattered, right? These ideas, these old principalities are suddenly without a home, without a way for them to be embodied. Especially for the uneducated, for the underprivileged, for the working man, for whom a hero like Superman, who again, Superman's early enemies, I mean, this is Action Comics #1, he's not fighting Lex Luthor in Action Comics #1, right? His early enemies were crooked landlords, people who were taking advantage of the poor. I think he's attacking a used car salesman in this, on the cover of Action Comics #1. Who could serve as a vindication and kind of a fulfillment of the problems and the desires that these working class people had. Now, these working class people are extremely underchurched in the 1920s, 1930s. It's no coincidence, I think, that the emergence of the costume superhero in the USA, and again, this is really an American phenomenon. It's not that other countries, I know we got some Canadians in our midst today, Canada has a great superhero tradition, but it was sort of like we infected them, and then they did their own thing with it, but is really an American phenomenon, right? So the costume superhero in the USA, the rise of its popularity corresponds with a massive drop-off in church attendance among American Protestants that happened in 1925 to 1935, this period called the American Religious Depression. You just go look it up. There's a lot of scholarship about this period. It's a really interesting period. Where you had things like the first great, the sort of the echoes of the first and second Great Awakening just sort of petering out, a lot of the early religious enthusiasm of the first couple of decades of the 20th century petering out. And then also, so for instance, there's a work about this, a study about this in 1960 published by Robert T. Handy, and he identified the American religious depression is being associated with what was the perceived failure of the American ideal during the interwar years. And the point that he makes, he was writing in 1960, so it was before the rise of before everything that's happened in all of our lifetimes, right? I don't need to go over that with you. But in the 1960s, he identified the American ideal with the Protestant religion and the American way of life, and points out that for people at the turn of the 20th century, those two things were the same thing, right? And so there's a lot of very ugly historical anti-Catholic sentiment and things like that we dealt with in this country, but a big part of that was this close association of a certain kind of Protestantism with the American way of life. I'm not ragging on Protestants. I grew up as one. Most of my family are still Protestants. So but I mean, this is what happened historically. Is that there was this very close association. So it's like, well, if you're not part of this religion, then you're also not a real American, and so you're suspect, right? And so, let's see here. Hold on. I think I got out of sync. Okay. All right. I think we're back in line now. Yeah, okay. No, we're not. What happened? Hold on. I don't know where I am now. Okay, it's all right. It's okay. I'll catch up. So, as the story fractured, the sacred story fractured, it fractured in a fractal way. Blah. Boy, I should have thought about that before I wrote that. As the sacred story fractured, it fractured in a fractal way. What do I mean by this? You guys know what a fractal is, right? It's a self-similar pattern. It's a pattern that repeats the same level. Right. Okay. Trees, easy example of fractal patterns. So the fractal breakdown of American Protestantism into a growing number of movements and denominations in the early 20th century during the American Religious Depression, and its embodiment of the American way of life, which was previously and predominantly a religious ideal, as these things broke down, as we lost confidence in our national story. These patterns, these principalities, begin to manifest in our culture in a different way. A friend of mine calls them, he's going to have a chapter in a book that's coming out next year from 8th Day Press that I'm editing called Finding the Golden Key, Essays Towards a Recovery of the Sacramental Imagination. And there's a couple of chapters in there on superheroes, and one of them written by a friend, he calls them four-color wonder workers, which is a nice turn of phrase. The embodiment of the American way of life, because it lost a way to be religiously embodied, manifested itself in these colorful costumed heroes, these four-color wonder workers who picked up where religion in America in those centuries, those decades, was leaving off. So under the medieval consensus, the poor and the oppressed might have looked to and called upon St. Nicholas to help them. In the late 1930s, nobody in America, unless you were of a part of a minority of Orthodox Christians or Roman Catholics, nobody in America was calling on St. Nicholas to help them, but they were living vicariously through the stories of Superman to find justice against corrupt politicians and abusive landlords. So one way, and I want to stress this is just one way to understand superheroes, is as principalities or as archetypes, if you prefer that, if that's a little easier, as archetypes in search of embodiment. The fact that the shattering of the sacred story has played out in a fractal way, breaking into smaller parts, which then break into smaller parts, has meant that the pieces which emerge are themselves still subject to the same shattering. You can think about like how a radioactive element has a half-life, right? Where it just keeps dividing, it keeps breaking down. And this results in heroic archetypes which manifest, but then which very quickly, usually within only a few months or years, have to re-manifest over and over again in a series of kind of usually predictable patterns. And the way that this seems to work is that the more attention or the more focus an archetype gets, the more likely it is to shatter into new variations. So that's a little abstract. Let me just give you an example of an archetype here. So this is an archetype I call the gargoyle. For obvious reasons. Actually, I like gargoyle as a name for this because, first of all, Batman is just always standing on a gargoyle, but also he is a gargoyle, right? Gargoyles are something that were added to medieval cathedrals, actually in the early modern period, and they're these sort of grotesque, demonic, draconic forms that they would put, but they don't put them just anywhere on a roof. They put them on the corners of these great Gothic cathedrals. Why? Because they need water spouts. Right? They need, you need to redirect the water away from the roof, because if the water pools on the roof, these roofs are made out of lots of very heavy materials, the water pools on it, it creates stress over time, water damage causes the roof to collapse. So how do you get the water, how do you get the forces of chaos off the top of your cathedral? You create a water spout, and the water spout looks like a gargoyle. And so when the rain comes down, it's just diverted off, right? That's what a gargoyle is. So a gargoyle, as an archetype, is a monster that holds back worse monsters, right? Batman being this, I think the phrase you used last night, Father Turbo, was sticky. I really like that. So Batman's the stickiest version of the archetype, right? It's really interesting to me how certain heroes, like certain characters, are extremely durable. You can do whatever you want to with Batman, but he always goes back to being Batman. Like, you just can't. Same thing with Superman. Like, you can only monkey with it so much. So the gargoyle holds back the worst monsters, right? The way that gargoyles function as waterspouts, redirecting the forces of chaos from the roof of the cathedral. So in the context of the larger story, like a Justice League story, there's usually only really space for one gargoyle. But if I focus my attention just on the gargoyle and make that the center of the story, then very quickly the story fractures, and we get the Bat family. We get Batwoman and Red Hood and Batgirl and Nightwing and Robin and better Robin. I'll let you guess which one I think is better. And Catwoman and Batwing and Signal and other Batgirl and Huntress and these are all like this is the pattern of the gargoyle, the pattern of Batman fracturing, right? Echoing. It's like the splinters of broken glass. So to sum it all up, superheroes are, among other things, ways of trying to answer our meaning crisis, the shattering of the sacred story which gave our world shape and meaning. They are a means of forging a common poetic referent. If I write a song, Superman never made any money saving the world from Solomon Grundy, right? Well, I don't have to, yeah, thank you, some of you. If I write a song lyric about Superman, about Batman, people know what I'm talking about. It's a shared poetic referent. The way that back in the ancient world you could have made a reference to Grani's burden, and everybody would have known you were talking about, that's just a kenning for gold, right, in Scandinavian poetry. So they're a means for us of forging a common poetic reference. They're a means for us of addressing contemporary societal ills, which is something superhero comics are always really concerned with doing, which is why in the 70s there were a lot of awful comics about substance abuse, which is like what every kid wants to read about, you know, demon in a bottle. Superheroes were means of I kind of hate this word, but representation, right? Where it really was a way for, like, especially early on, for the common man to feel like they could tell there was a story for them, a story about them. And then ultimately, superheroes are constantly emerging and vanishing, you could say, ideas, vying for our attention, trying to become principalities. But even as superheroes emerge as the colorful shards of the fracturing of the sacred story, they continue to shatter in what you might call a fractal pattern. So if the sacred story is a fractal pattern going up, right, the mountain of God, right, its breakdown also plays out in this fractal way. So the shattering plays out on the meta level within the comics industry, and also on the story level, through the emergence into popular consciousness of the multiverse. So comic books, superheroes, and stories, and the derived films, they're one of the only forms of media in which the industry and the societal pressures that affect the writing of the canon are addressed on a meta level within the metaphysics of the story itself. That was a really abstract thing to say. If you were not tracking, don't worry about it. I'll explain more when we get to some concrete examples. It's easier to track with that. What I'm saying is that the superheroes are kind of unique in that the constant fracturing of the world outside of the story is acknowledged by the constant fracturing of the metaphysics that's happening within inside the story world. If maybe that's an easier way to kind of understand it. So let's talk about the life and the death of the multiverse. Great Alex Ross painting. All right, so I think when I say the multiverse, everyone knows what I'm talking about, but just for the sake of clarity, I'll have a couple of quick explanations. Well, actually, let's do this way because I'm going to run out of time. Who here is not sure what I mean when I say the multiverse? It's okay. Don't be embarrassed. Okay, yeah. I mean, you're all nerds here, right? It's all nerds. Like, you guys know what I'm talking about. So, typically speaking, the version of the multiverse. Hold on. Do we have any quantum physicists in the room? Okay, good. The most popular version that appears in our comics, in our TV, our movies right now, somewhere between, let's say, the what is technically called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is every time you make a decision, every possible decision you would make happens somewhere and spawns a new universe. If you've ever seen the episode Remedial Chaos Theory from the show Community, that's a perfect example of this kind of this belief, right? So it's like, you know, like, who goes to get the pizza? Well, if I go to get the pizza, that's one universe. If Father Turbo goes to get the pizza, that's another universe. If Father David goes to get the pizza, that's the darkest timeline, right? The whole thing, yeah, exactly. So there's also what is called the ultimate ensemble theory of the multiverse. This is basically the idea that every possibility already exists, every universe where we are all Plato people, right? That exists, and all universes exist and are equally real. And this is more or less the theory, for instance, of the multiverse that is used in the show Rick and Morty. So the multiverse poses certain problems, moral, ethical, existential, which we seem to be grappling with at the moment in our biggest pop culture franchises. I'm going to mostly talk about comics, but let me just talk real quick about Rick and Morty and a couple other things. So we learned very early on in the season 1 of Rick and Morty. I don't necessarily recommend Rick and Morty. It's a really depressing, very foul show. But it is very well written, and it's, I mean, the main thing that it has to commend itself is that it's like a really saturated, like really concentrated, you know, ever buy like beef bouillon? Well, this is the beef bouillon of nihilism. Like, it's just all really concentrated, really packed into a single container. So we learned very early on in season 1 of Rick and Morty that one of the two main characters, Rick, who is a powerfully hedonistic, and as the show constantly reminds us, a nigh godlike scientist, is an interdimensional traveler. Worse, he has no world to call his own. He moves to other universes whenever his hubris destroys the one that he lives in. So he'll do a thing and it'll completely destroy the universe, and then he'll just pack up and move to a different universe and live there. And what he says is, listen, there's an infinite number of universes, so it doesn't actually matter, right? What I do, you die, you live, I die, I live. It doesn't matter because everything has already happened, right? So episode after episode, the show wrestles with the consequences of this cosmology. Since everything exists, everything has happened, nothing matters. And more often than not, the takeaway from this is one of hedonism, right? And sometimes it's just like actual ugly hedonism. Sometimes it's something more like, well, we may as well just enjoy the time that we have with the people that we have because nothing else matters. And that's the only really reasonable solution to this knowledge. This last year, there's also a movie that came out called Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Some of you may have seen this. It's a very weird movie, very sort of absurdist movie in the truest sense. It's one of the more eloquent recent attempts that we've had to tackle the questions posed by the multiverse, right? So the multiverse, again, is this way that our pop culture is expressing the multiplicity, the fracturing of the sacred story, right? This sort of constant infinite variety, infinite diversity, which can never, it's never stable, it can never really hold our attention. It's constantly splintering and shattering. So in this movie, which has one of my favorite actors, if you ever saw Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Michelle Yeoh, she's in this movie. In this movie, the universe is being swallowed up by nihilism, which is embodied as the everything bagel, as an everything bagel. I told you it's kind of an absurd film. An everything bagel at the center of the multiverse. The idea is the bagel has everything on it. So if everything exists, if everything is possible, if everything has happened, then there's no meaningful choice. So what's the point? So the main character's daughter has had her mind open to every single version of herself across the multiverse, and as a result, she has been swallowed up by nihilism. And so the film deals with nihilism in various ways, such as the endless bureaucracy of the IRS. But ultimately, it offers kind of more or less like Rick and Morty answers to it, which are alternately absurdist, practical, sentimental. I'll just read something from one of the filmmakers. It says, the living contradiction that is the everything bagel. If you put everything on a bagel, what more is left? And if you've experienced everything that the multiverse can offer, what's the point of any of it? And so it's an interesting film, but ultimately it's one of these films that comes very close to trying to offer an answer for nihilism, but its own the worldview, the framework that the filmmakers are working within doesn't allow them to actually pose a solution, right? So they point out it's something that points out a problem very eloquently, but doesn't offer a good solution. And then I'm sure most of us saw Loki and the sort of the coming of the multiverse to the MCU. So the Loki miniseries that debuted on Disney Plus deals with questions of the multiverse, nihilism, multiplicity. And they did this by splitting timelines, which I just have to push my nerd glasses very far up on my nose right now and say that alternate timelines and the multiverse, technically not the same thing. But anyway. So once again, it deals with infinite variation and nihilism, but this time it's with the danger of trying to exert too much absolute control, which is another danger here, over the sacred timeline, an attempt to destroy the margin. And it's no coincidence that, of course, the protagonist is a very marginal character themselves. Like even in mythology, right? Loki is a shapeshifter, and more. You know, shapeshifter, horse mother. You know, like Loki in mythology is super weird. And it all ends with this really curious scene. That's kind of a reverse Garden of Eden, in which the serpent is the one holding back the forces of chaos, and the woman chooses to unleash them by killing the serpent and unleashing endless multiplicity. One could say a multiverse of madness on the MCU. See what I did there? So contemporary. All right, so let's move on to Crisis on Infinite Earths, because I've only got about 15 minutes left or something like that. What is my actual stop time? Somebody tell me. Okay, 15 minutes. Okay, I can do this. We can totally do this. Okay, we can totally do this. I just have to summarize 1,400 pages of comics in the next 15 minutes. Not a big deal. So I want to talk about where the multiverse comes from, and also these comics, which I think again pose some really interesting questions and maybe provide some solutions for how do we deal with multiplicity and nihilism and the constant fracturing of our sacred story that we're being faced with today. So I want to talk first of all about the most important comic that many of you have never read. Who here, by show of hands, I know some of you have, by show of hands, who here has actually read Crisis on Infinite Earths? You know what? I'll take it. That's pretty good. Yeah, a lot of people haven't read this. It came out in 1985. It's kind of long. And like maybe that wasn't what you woke up thinking you were going to do this morning. Is go home and buy a copy of a kind of a long comic that came out in 1985. But Crisis on Infinite Earths is very important. And the DC multiverse wasn't created with this comic. It actually originates in a Silver Age comic called The Flash of Two Worlds. But this is where the idea really comes of age, you could say. So the Crisis on Infinite Earths, it was so in comics there's something called the annual crossover, the yearly crossover. DC started doing this, later on Marvel picked it up and doing it, and basically it's let's get all of our favorite properties together, and once a year let's do a big crossover book that will get everyone to come and buy a comic, because everyone loves to see peanut butter and jelly fight each other, right? But also it sheds more light on maybe some of our less popular books. So it's a book selling gimmick, but it's also like very satisfying as a fan most of the time. Sometimes it's kind of a shameless cash grab. But so this is an annual crossover event, but it was one unlike anything that DC had done before, because at this point DC Comics has been around since, depending on how you do the math, the late 1930s, so about 50 years, and they have 50 years of comics messy continuity. Nobody really, in the early days of comics, nobody had a concept of canon. Like, just because Superman had this power in the last week's comic doesn't mean you're ever going to see that come up again. Like, they didn't think people cared, They thought this was for kids. And so they got about 50, yeah, I know. So they got about 50 years of stuff that needs to be cleaned up. And they want to resolve canon issues. They want to make things cleaner, more streamlined, make a cleaner, more streamlined version of the DC universe that would appeal to newer readers. In other words, there's too much multiplicity, right? And that infinite variety had begun to tip over into nihilism. At some point, everything had happened, and now, as a new reader coming to the DC universe, you just look at it and say, well, there's nowhere to start. Why bother, right? So, it introduces a story in which the universe is being devoured by a cosmic entity called the Anti-Monitor, who is a being of pure antimatter who hates the multiverse and wants to devour it, leaving emptiness and darkness. In other words, anti-matter, right? Anti-life, anti-existence. These are things that are going to come up over and over again in the series of these three series. Something has no existence, no ontology in and of itself. Opposing him is the Monitor, who watches over and maintains the multiverse, or of positive or normal matter. And the Monitor assembles a team of heroes to attempt to foil the Anti-Monitor's plans. One of those heroes, I'm sorry for going so quickly, one of those heroes who is very soon converted to the Anti-Monitor side is a villain called the Psychopirate. The Psychopirate, as his name implies, has the ability to hijack the emotions of others. And he is incredibly important to the Anti-Monitor's strategy, because nihilism needs this kind of emotional manipulation to serve as its herald. If you don't believe me, you haven't watched the news recently, in which case, good for you. In fact, there's a whole kind of a dialogue about this after the Psychopirate converts to the Anti-Monitor's side, starts serving the forces of nihilism. And the Monitor says, I needed him more than either basically any of these other heroes, because the menace we deal with is one of emotion, right? So this emotional manipulation, control, this is key to the Anti-Monitor's strategy. Nihilism is a menace of emotion. It's a menace of despair. All right. So the Monitor ultimately sacrifices himself to see off two key worlds. So there's an infinity of universes, right? But there are two key worlds to all of this, and they're usually called Earth 1 and Earth 2. And yes, that nomenclature was come up with by the people who lived on Earth 1. Nobody's ever like, I think this is Earth 4, right? No. So the Monitor ultimately sacrifices himself to seal off 2 key worlds, and then 3 more are protected in sort of the pocket universe for a total of 5. So, and these universes are sealed off, these universes are sealed off from the Anti-Monitor's assault. So out of an infinity of possible worlds, only 5 remain, and it's here that the heroes make their last stand. And this turns out to be the first of a series of personal sacrifices which allow the heroes to overcome the Anti-Monitor's nihilism and save the remaining realities. And so the Anti-Monitor sacrifices himself, and then later on, a little bit later, Supergirl sacrifices herself to save Superman, without whom, as we're going to eventually learn, the DC multiverse cannot actually exist. Superman, and that's like something that's true on the level of publishing, but also true like within the story. Superman is necessary to the defeat of nihilism in a way that other heroes are not. And then, very importantly, the Flash, the Barry Allen Flash, very importantly to the story, he sacrifices himself. He outruns the Anti-Monitor's antimatter cannon, or as I like to call it, the anti-cannon cannon. Yeah, okay. Thank you, yeah. And he sacrifices himself to save the 5 remaining worlds. So ultimately, the Anti-Monitor is finally and totally destroyed and defeated when the Golden Age Superman and the Superboy of our world, like the Superboy of the reader's world, aka Superboy Prime, is going to come up again in a minute, they're able to deal the Anti-Monitor his death blow. But that comes at the cost of a great sacrifice, because their worlds have themselves been lost. So these characters, who represent kind of respectively the golden age of comics and then the world of the reader, right, the world of the readers themselves, have defeated nihilism, but it has come at the cost of their own world. So through the character of Alexander Luthor, who's the son of Lex Luthor, from a universe where Lex Luthor is the only hero in a world full of supervillains, who has somehow sort of hypostatically joined matter and antimatter in himself. So he's this living paradox. They're able through him, and you can't quite see it in this image, but like he's standing in a very kind of a cruciform way. They're able to enter a paradise dimension, right? And so they are the remainder at the end of the story's mathematical equation, and this is how they're accounted for. And so it seems, for a while, that everyone has a happy ending, at least until we get to a story called Infinite Crisis, or as I like to call it, the multiverse's midlife crisis. So this comes out 30 years later in 2005. And in the 30 years that have transpired since the first crisis on Infinite Earths, things have begun to unravel. And when I say things have begun to unravel, comics have gotten dark. All our beloved heroes have become shades of gray. The unified story has begun to fracture, with concepts like hypertime coming in, replacing the various multiversal ideas. Again, alternate timelines, not quite the same thing. And we can see that here in the establishing shots of the very first pages of Infinite Crisis. Superman is flying over the ruins of the crashed Justice League watchtower, the Justice League orbital satellite where the headquarters are. He's flying over the ruins, the ruins of which have crashed into the moon. And this is following the Justice League's greatest crisis of trust among its members, while someone else, we find out later it's the Golden Age Superman, who's watching all of this from the Paradise Dimension. I said that sentence out loud. This is a good day. He's flying over he's watching from and he says, and he's speaking of the modern era of superheroes, he says, they've forgotten why they're here. So what's happened in the last 30 years of comics? Well, we had something called the Bronze Age of comics, or sometimes the Dark Age of comics. The story Batman Nightfall, in which Batman's back is broken by Bane and he has to stop being Batman for a while. We get Asbat, who everybody hated. It's terrible. We get the death of Superman, one of my favorite comic books of all time. We get Wonder Woman's own totally forgettable identity crisis. I said what I said. We get 0 Hour, the fall of Hal Jordan. We get the identity crisis, where Batman finds out that some of the other members of the Justice League wiped his memories because he morally objected to something they were doing. And then Batman once he finds this out, Batman sanely and reasonably forgives everybody and moves on. Oh, wait, no. He builds a giant spy satellite to spy on the Earth's heroes, and then it gets hijacked by bad guys, and it turns like 1 million people in the world into evil robots. Things went bad. And then, of course, this ends with, and the thing that happened just right before the beginning of Infinite Crisis is that Wonder Woman kills the supervillain Maxwell Lord on television because he's mind-controlling Superman and making Superman kill a bunch of people. So anyway, it's just a bad time. Like stories have gotten dark, things have gotten kind of out of control, and we'd be reasonably justified in feeling, as the Golden Age Superman does, that the heroes have lost their way. Now remember that superheroes are always closely tied to the American project and to our self-identity as Americans. So you can see in this two-page spread right here that we see the 3 core members of the Justice League and of the DC Universe as a whole arguing about their crime-fighting methodologies and over the ways that each of them have failed each other during these recent events. And at the same time, you maybe can't see it super well, but at the same time, overlaid kind of faintly over this, each panel, we see Uncle Sam. Now, Uncle Sam and the Freedom Fighters, who are originally from Earth X, in case anybody's keeping track, are being killed by the Secret Society of Supervillains. This is happening somewhere else in the story at this time. Uncle Sam in DC Comics is a mystical being who literally represents the spirit of the United States. And so, as the 3 most important superheroes of all time are arguing and about to split up and go their separate ways, the mystical spirit of the U.S. is being killed by supervillains, and they overlay these images over each other. It's very conscious, and of course, this is being published in 2005, when, we remember after 9/11 we had this big consensus as like Americans, like we all felt a certain way about a certain thing, and then in 2005, 2006, this starts to unravel. How do I know? Because a bunch of my buddies went off to war after 9/11, and a lot of them came back with PTSD, and a lot of them came back missing legs, right? And we sort of, like, our confidence was kind of shattered, like, was it worth it? Right? These are questions that we're starting to ask ourselves. So, desperate to save the DC Universe from itself and from the forces of darkness and nihilism which have poisoned its heroes, the Golden Age Superman breaks out of the Paradise dimension literally by punching through it, and also because he hopes that by restoring the old multiverse he can save his Lois Lane, who is at this point dying of old age. So eventually, we find out, there we go. Eventually we find out that everything bad that's been happening in the DC Universe lately is actually a result of our Superboy, the Superboy from the world of the readers, Superboy Prime, and then Alexander Luthor. Remember this? He's the good guy from the previous story. Well, turns out if you like leave a Luthor to ferment long enough in a Paradise dimension, he just turns into a supervillain. Who could have seen this coming? And remember, they're the leftovers, they're the margins of the old multiverse. And they've been manipulating events in order to restore the multiverse so that they can find their perfect world. So they've duped Golden Age Superman into helping with this because, as Luthor says right here in this panel over on the far right, everything comes from Superman. So this comic begins to reinforce this idea that there's something ontologically essential about Superman to the DC multiverse, that no DC multiverse actually exists without Superman. And so in this scene, you can't get like much more obvious than this, where they show like Luthor uses Superman as a tuning fork and splits him. You know, all of his infinite selves, the infinite versions of Superman across the multiverse, uses Golden Age Superman to kind of split him to recreate the multiverse. And then he literally begins to like mash the worlds together, trying to combine them to create his ideal Earth. And one of the points of Infinite Crisis is to say that there is no ideal Earth because an ideal Earth doesn't need a Superman, right? If it's a perfect world, why does it need a hero? One of the things that this story really asks is, what kind of heroes do we need, right? So although all of this was Alexander Luthor's plan, the real force of nihilism in the story is Superboy Prime. The Superboy he's supposed to be from the Prime that is the reader's universe. Superboy Prime represents, among other things, a kind of toxic nostalgia, a longing for the good old days, and among other things, the desire to force them to return by any means necessary. You could say he's actually for us as Orthodox Christians, he's the opposite of tradition with a capital T, right? In the way that, which is really in this story, could be represented by Golden Age Superman, who does represent this kind of living tradition. Tradition and that kind of toxic nostalgia, they're not the same thing. After he kills many of the Earth's heroes, including the post-crisis Superboy Connor Kent, he finally embraces his role of the villain in the story. After all, every bad thing will be justified if he just gets his Earth back. Because the things he's done in this other world don't matter. Because he doesn't consider it to be the real world. Eventually, of course, he's defeated, and reality is rewritten again, and the core DC universe is relabeled New Earth. Now, the message of Infinite Crisis, which is actually my favorite of the three stories I'm talking about today, is very complex. It starts out by admitting that something has gone wrong with our story as Americans, as moderns, etc., and it's being reflected in the way that we've lost confidence in our heroes. We've become increasingly unable to tell stories about them as heroes, but it also ultimately rejects the idea that we can just shrug off everything that's happened to us and go back to a prior golden age, which may or may not have existed. Instead, the solution is once again personal sacrifice. The Golden Age Superman gives his life to defeat Superboy Prime by dragging him through the heart of Krypton's red sun, meaning that Superboy Prime ironically kills the last remnant of the thing that he was nostalgic for. And the heroes agree not to let a sacrifice go to waste. At the end of the story, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman all take a year off of being heroes to go back to their roots and figure out what it means to be a hero again. Self-sacrifice, introspection, a reliance upon, and the embracing of community. These are the cures which Infinite Crisis offers in the face of nihilism and a loss of confidence in our heroes. I know I'm out of time. I'm going to go real quick through Final Crisis. Is that okay? Okay. All right. I'm going to try to go real fast. Okay. This is Darkseid. He's the god of evil in the DC universe. I do not have time to explain this. He's obsessed with finding and using something called the anti-life equation to end all life in the universe. He's very powerful. He's very bad. He has zappy eyes. That's all I'm going to say about Darkseid. What's that?
Darkseid is.
Yeah, Darkseid is, yeah. So in most stories about Darkseid, he's obsessed with finding something called the anti-life equation. So the Final Crisis is a story about the day that evil won. The good gods and the evil gods of the DC universe have the Ragnarok, evil wins, but Darkseid is now falling through the multiverse, falling down through the universe, and he's dragging everything sort of down to hell with him, dragging everything down to something beyond hell, just this obliteration, just nihilism. And Darkseid becomes sort of a black hole of nihilism into which the entire DC multiverse is sinking. And the anti-life equation, I mean, we can see here, people who are under the control of the anti-life equation are being told, work, consume, die, judge others, condemn the different, exploit the weak. So there you go. I mean, this stuff is like, comics are not like known for their subtlety. The anti-life equation turns sentient life into Darkseid's slaves, people who mindlessly perpetuate despair through an endless cycle of consumerism, work, and pointless violence. If Darkseid is not stopped, he'll drag all of Earth down into nihilism with him, and everything will be destroyed. By the way, there's one of the strange, even upside-down things about this story and about Grant Morrison's worldview in general, is the way in which religious imagery plays out. So Darkseid and his followers use a lot of appropriated Christian vocabulary, like hallelujah, and other phrases like God being made flesh and things like that, but they use it in this really dark, inverted way. There are 3 books that appear over and over again in this epic. 2 of them are evil books, the Crime Bible and the Book of Limbo, which are works of destruction and nihilism. The only book that's depicted as being anything like a holy book is Darwin's Origin of Species, which is destroyed by Darkseid's minions after it was being preserved by the heroes. And so, yeah, Morrison is trying to get some shots in at religion, but we're going to see that he's ultimately not very successful. You'll see. So despite all of this, Morrison he can't get away from Christian imagery because the most important character to this story is Superman. And here we see the Superman of a multiverse, and he's depicted with something like a halo, but also a little bit like a crown of thorns. And at this point, let me explain. No, there's no time. Let me sum up. Superman's wife, Lois Lane, has been injured by a bomb set by Darkseid's minions. There's nothing on Earth, not even the amazing purple ray technology of the Amazons, Wonder Woman's people, which can heal her. She only has 1 heartbeat left. So during the moment between her final heartbeat, her last 2 heartbeats, Superman is approached by a being from outside of the multiverse, from a new race of monitors. Remember the monitor from Crisis on Infinite Earths? Well, after Crisis on Infinite Earths ended, the monitor was reborn as like a bunch of monitors. And Superman is approached by a monitor from outside the universe. She offers Superman something that will heal Lois, a single drop of the bleed. the life force of the multiverse itself. And in return, Superman travels with her to what is essentially the world of platonic forms, called the Nil, where with the help of Superman from a variety of universes, he uploads his essence into a giant robot made of pure thought and battles a vampiric monitor, the Mandrak, who is feeding off the life force of the multiverse. This is Superman in a giant thought robot fighting a cosmic vampire. Okay, that's all I got to say about that. So this character, this Mandrak, he's one of the most powerful and eldest of the monitors. Man, I can't sum all this up. But anyway, basically he's a vampire that is trying to feed upon the multiverse, and it turns out he's the one that's responsible for Darkseid's fall, and who's been manipulating events to lead to this final crisis. So there's a villain, there's a force of nihilism inside the multiverse, which is Darkseid, and then Mandrak, who's the force of nihilism outside the multiverse. It was really considered necessary to have two of those guys in the story. So Superman's eventually able to defeat Mandrak, temporarily anyway. He returns inside of the multiverse where he revives Lois Lane with a kiss. And they said nobody can, nothing can hold or contain the bleed. They said they were wrong. Superman can. It's a little corny, but it's a very beautiful moment in the comic. And so here it's clear that Superman is something so key to the DC universe as a whole that he can actually go outside of the DC multiverse and then come back inside of it, bringing something life-giving back into it in order to restore it. It's a very Christological figure. Morrison portrays organized religion in the story as demonic. What's going to save the multiverse? It's a weird mashup of like mysticism and science. Superman has shown the plans for something called the Miracle Machine, which is a machine that harnesses the willpower of a single thought into a single action. It's powered by the sun, just like Superman, so it runs on Superman. And as the world continues to end, the heroes defeat Darkseid. Batman shoots him with a time-traveling bullet, while the Flash has lured the Black Racer, who is the death of the new gods. He's a Grim Reaper on skis. I mean, it's very metal. To Darkseid, which destroys his physical form, and then at the bottom of Forever, Superman simply sings Darkseid away. This beautiful moment right here. Sings Darkseid away. It turns out that Morrison can only science so hard, you guys. And so he tries to explain this way by saying, well, everything's just vibrations, frequencies. This is common terminology in the DCU, but also like common like speculative physics, like M theory and things like this. But ultimately, he can't let this moment be except what it is, which is hundreds of heroes have paid the ultimate sacrificial price to defeat Darkseid, and all that is left of this nihilistic force is shattered by the beauty of a song. And by the way, that vampire lurking at the bottom of the multiverse, Superman uses the Miracle Machine to summon an army of Supermen and Green Lanterns from across the multiverse, and together they stake Mandrake for good. This final crisis is it's the most difficult of these three to read. It is basically an acid trip, and it will it's a hoot though. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so let me just sum all this up. Each crisis event that DC does, and they've already done actually several since Final Crisis. It's kind of like it's sort of a Holy Roman Empire kind of a thing there, right? Final Crisis was published in 2008. Every time DC does a crisis event, it remakes the DC cosmos. It retcons pretty much everything that I've just told you, and it makes the thread harder and harder to trace because that fracturing is still happening. Just like the heroes that never really go away, though they constantly manifest and remanifest, so too the villains return again and again. After all, it's called the never-ending battle, right? The story keeps fracturing. Nihilism keeps coming up. It is always ultimately the kind of danger which the story reminds us about, even as the genre itself struggles against it. So to bring all this home, what do we do? Well, one of the things we need to do is commit ourselves to restoring the sacred story. Understanding, and this begins by, first of all, understanding our place and the place of these kinds of stories on the mountain of God, the holy mountain. This is an image, by the way, by my friend Jonathan Pajot. It's called the image of everything. Because it's the shape of the cosmos, right? With the cross at the top, the mountain of God, the Garden of Eden, the chaos trying to eat away at the walls of the world. The cosmos as fractal, we need to be able to understand the cosmos as the church teaches us to see it, which is as a hierarchy of fractal patterns. That are united by their participation in the sacred story. The reason some characters, for instance, like Superman, tend not to fracture is because of the high degree to which they already participate in the story of Christ. We need to place things in their proper place on the mountain, and that begins with the ordering of our own lives, right? Ordering our lives around prayer, fasting, the Holy Scriptures, and the life of the church. And ultimately, by embracing the heroic struggle of self-denial and self-sacrifice on behalf of each other and on behalf of our families. And if we can do this, then the forces of nihilism, the multiplicity, all the things that eat away at us and try to take away our sacred story, because the story never went anywhere. Christ didn't go anywhere, right? Those things can be shattered with a very simple song. And if I had to guess, probably goes something like, Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. So that's all I have to say to you today. I'm sorry that some of it was rushed and I've gone over. There's some links up here if you're interested in my stuff and you want to find out more. Father David already talked about this earlier. I do have a superhero novel out. It's a pulp novel, and we're working on developing into a graphic novel right now. So there are links to all the stuff up here if you want to take a picture and check them out. You guys have been great. I don't know if we have time left for questions. No, we don't. But if you have questions, there's two things, real quick. If you have questions and you want to just come and talk to me about why is Grant Morrison so weird, we can do that. Also, I do have copies of the Akbari here with me today. And if you want to grab one, we can figure out a PayPal or whatever. I'll just come and find me. I'll be happy to sign it for you. So that's it.
Thank you.
Oh, forgive me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
So I guess we'll take how many minutes? 5 minutes? 5 minutes to get to your next session. Sorry about the rush. We want to keep a tight ship so you have plenty of time at lunch to have the conversations.
Oh, I'll take that.
You're fine. Let me just move my stuff out of the way.
But the thing was that he never really got to the reason why. It's like, well, people naturally deserve it, deserve where and everything. And he never gave an answer for that. So that's kind of what led me back there.
Who is the next person? Two people, actually. It's going to be SK Era and Eve Tushnet.
So I guess first SK.
Yeah, SK. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty good. We're spending like years on this before talking about hyper-crisis stuff.
So did do you know if the streaming worked on that last one?
That reminds me, I got to go shut it off.
Okay. Where's the camera?
We'll soon find out.
Whenever you're ready, you can just push the record button, and that's it. And then when you're done, you can just yeah, the red button to start the recording, and then when you're done, just push the stop button, the square. And this is gonna